The test is in 4 parts: Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. Now look at Part 1.
Part 1. Part 1.
You'll hear someone booking transport for a trip. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 and 2. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 and 2. Good morning, Burnham Coaches. Sarah speaking. How can I help you?
Yes. Good morning. I'm a teacher at the Down Language School. We have a bit of a problem, and I was wondering if you could help us out.
What is the problem exactly?
Well, we normally take our students on an excursion at the end of their course. But unfortunately, the coach firm we normally use has let us down. It seems they've gone out of business.
I'm sorry to hear that. I suppose you are looking for a replacement.
Well, yes. We won't need a very large coach, actually. There will be 30 students and 4 teachers.
So that's 34 in all. And what dates did you have in mind?
The last Saturday and Sunday of this month. That's the 28th and 29th.
The 28th and 29th. Does that mean you are planning to stay somewhere overnight?
That's right. Actually, we want to do the same excursion that we do every year. We usually visit Stonehenge, Salisbury, and stay overnight in Bath. It's a historical tour, really.
It sounds interesting. Let me just see what we have available. Oh dear, I'm afraid all our coaches are booked out for the 28th. It's the busiest time of the year for us, actually.
I was afraid that would be a problem. But you have a coach available for the 29th?
Yes, we do. And it's available for the 30th as well, if that's any help to you.
I'm afraid not. Sunday is the last day. The students go home on Monday. I think we'll just have to change our plans a bit and leave out Salisbury. It's a shame, but I don't think we can fit in all 3 places in one day.
So you would like to book the coach for the 29th, visiting Stonehenge and Bath, is that right?
Yes, I think so.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 3 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 3 to 10. Right, I just need a few details, sir.
OK. My name is Paul Scott.
S-C-O-T?
It's double T, actually.
I'm sorry. And it's the Down Language School. Could you give me the address for that, Mr. Scott?
Yes, it's Down House, Hill Street, Brighton. Do you need the postcode?
No, that's not necessary, but I do need a contact number.
Of course. The number for the school secretary is 01273 512 634. You can contact her if you need to speak to anyone.
Right, and what time would you like the coach to pick you up?
Well, I think we'll have to make an early start. Would 7:30 be all right?
Yes, no problem at all. What time do you want to be back?
Oh, any time between 10 and 11 will be all right. Not later than 11, though.
Right, I'll make a note of that. 11 p.m. latest. There's just one more thing I need to know. Presumably, you'll be visiting Stonehenge first. How long do you want to stay there?
Well, we normally stay about an hour. The main objective of the excursion is for the students to see the Georgian architecture in Bath, really.
Yes, Bath is lovely, isn't it? I was there myself a couple of years ago. I thought the Royal Crescent was absolutely stunning. I hadn't realised how large it is. Well, I think that's all I need to know, Mr. Scott. Thank you for booking with us.
Just a minute. There's one thing you seem to have forgotten. How much will this cost?
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I was thinking about Bath. Just bear with me a moment. Yes, it's a round trip of 300 miles and a total time of 16 hours for the driver. For a 45-seater coach, that will be a total of £500, including tax and insurance.
Do we have to have such a large coach? There are only 34 of us.
We don't have any smaller coaches, I'm afraid.
Oh well. At least we won't be cramped for space. When do we have to pay?
We require a 20% deposit to confirm the booking. I suggest that you do that as soon as possible, today if you can. The balance you can give to the driver if you're paying by cheque. Have the cheque made out to Burnham Coaches.
I think that'll be all right. I will have to check this with the school accountant, but if all is well, I'll arrange for someone to bring you the deposit within the next 2 hours.
That'll be fine, Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You'll hear 2 university students discussing experiments.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
Hi, Al. Sorry to interrupt you when you're having your lunch, but I wanted to ask you a favour.
Oh, sure, no problem. Sit down, Josie. I've finished anyway. What do you need?
Well, I was wondering if I could ask you about the experiments we were talking about in the seminar the other day with Dr. Robinson. I'm doing my teaching practice on Thursday and Friday, and I'm a bit concerned about it. I wasn't entirely sure I understood them completely. If I don't understand them, then the pupils don't have any chance.
You mean the ones to determine the speed of sound?
Yes, that's right. Well, I think I understood the first one, but the second one was more complicated.
Yes, that's true. Well, let's check what you thought of the first one, the one that you'll have to take the kids outside for.
Okay, let me see. Well, you need to get 2 groups to stand exactly 200 metres apart on the playing fields, and one has a bell or a loudspeaker or some other loud sound source and a flag, and the other group has a stopwatch.
Yes, although it doesn't have to be 200 meters. It's just that it makes the experiment easier the more distance between them. It depends on the space available.
Right, and the idea is that one group raises the flag at exactly the same moment as they make a noise, and the other group starts the stopwatch when they see the flag and stops it when they hear the noise.
That's it.
And then you get them to do a simple calculation of velocity equals time divided by distance.
Yeah, it's a bit low-tech and it's not very accurate, but they should be able to get within about 20% of the actual figure if they're reasonably careful.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
OK, so I understand that. It's the other one, the one with the tube I was having a few problems with. Can you just talk me through that and tell me exactly what I have to explain to the pupils?
Okay. Well, the thing to remember is that sound is a wave, and waves have both frequency and wavelength. You should start them off with exploring waves in water, and that'll introduce a few key concepts. Sound waves aren't exactly the same because they're compression waves, but it's more or less the same principle, at least for pupils at this level.
I've got some ideas for that. So they understand wavelength and frequency, and then we move on to the experiment. For that we need, let me just have a look at my notes. A long tube, a tuning fork, and a large barrel of water. Now, what do they do with those? And what's the point of it?
It's fairly simple, really. You just have to remember that velocity equals wavelength times frequency.
Ah, yes, that's the key, isn't it?
Yes, the tuning fork is manufactured to produce a sound of a given frequency. So that just leaves you one thing to measure. The pupils hit the tuning fork so that it makes a sound and hold it toward the end of the long open tube. That makes the air vibrate. They should slowly move the tube up and down. They'll find that in some positions it gets louder. That's because of resonance.
What's that again?
It's when there are a whole number of waves in the column of air in the tube. It makes it louder. They then measure the length of the column of air, and they can work out the wavelength from that.
And that's more accurate than the other experiment?
Well, it is if the pupils take an average using different tuning forks. It should be much more accurate.
Thanks, Al. That's clear to me now. I can't think of any more problems.
Just make sure that the pupils keep good records. You need to tell them how important that is. Any mistakes with the maths can be corrected later, but you don't want them to have to go back and get the data again. You probably wouldn't have time for that anyway.
Good advice, yes. I just hope it goes well in the classroom now.
Good luck.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear students and a tutor discussing an energy project.
You now have 30 seconds to read questions 21 to 27.
Good morning, Phil. Jackie. I hope your project is going well.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson.
Hi, Mr. Jackson. Well, we've made a start on analysing the different forms of renewable energy, but unfortunately, we don't really agree on some points.
Okay, why don't we talk about it?
Well, Jackie believes that all forms of renewable energy are beneficial economically, whereas I doubt that that's true for all of them.
Such as?
Such as wind, wave, and solar energy, because they're less reliable.
That's a valid point, but I don't think that's a large enough factor to disregard it completely.
Exactly. That's what I said.
However, another drawback is that they're generally very expensive to produce.
Yes, you're right, and that is a concern when evaluating their usefulness in future.
I agree with you to a point, but it's likely that the cost will come down. I read a report in the Journal of Environmental Science that estimates the cost would fall by 20% over the next 10 years, which is significant, isn't it?
Absolutely, Jackie. But you need to think about how difficult it is to predict the future cost of non-traditional energy sources before you believe the report. Remember, in your project, I want to see evidence of critical analysis. Make sure you've analyzed all the information rather than just accepting the information that you agree with. Also, it's very important that you demonstrate wide reading around the subject.
I know. It's just that I'm not convinced that it's going to continue to be that expensive, especially if there's a demand from consumers.
Well, what about if we analyze the costing process as part of our project?
That's an excellent idea, Phil. Okay, so let's imagine that we want to forecast the cost of producing solar energy. How could we do that, Jackie?
Well, I think we'd have to start by working out how many hours of daylight there are in the UK per year.
The Meteorological Office would have data on that.
Then estimate the number of hours of sun to get a rough total.
And then I suppose we'd need to work out how much it would cost to supply the average home with solar power, and then extrapolate that to get a number for the whole country.
Good. And don't forget the price of power conversion stations. This will have a significant impact on overall expenditure. And there's one more factor you haven't taken into account yet regarding the consumers.
Whether they would change from traditional to renewable energy?
No, but think about what might make them change.
Oh, yes. How much they would be willing to pay.
Exactly. Well done.
You now have 15 seconds to read questions 28 to 30.
So, our project is going to cover three main areas. Firstly, comparing the main forms of alternative energy, solar, wind, wave, and biofuels in terms of production costs. Secondly, we'll take solar energy as an example and do a cost prediction. And lastly, we'll analyze whether they're likely to replace traditional fossil fuels in the future.
That sounds like a comprehensive project with a good focus. Now, what data are you going to use and what approach will you use for the analysis?
Now that's something we do agree on. We want to use the reports you gave us in our last lecture and some statistics from the Government, Environment and Energy Department. In terms of analysis, we're going to use a cross-referencing method where we compare each of the government reports with the Robertson report and highlight any differences. Then we'll analyze these to see why the differences exist and where more research needs to be done.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You are going to hear a lecturer giving a talk about work placements for psychology students.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good morning. I'm here today to talk about the placement that's offered to all psychology students. As you all know, this takes place in the third year of the Psychology BSc. I'm here to explain a little about the placement and how the process works. A lot of preparation's involved in getting these placements right, so you need to be thinking about this now. Students taking up a placement year benefit immensely from the experience. To find decent employment in the field of psychology, the chances are you'll need to undertake some form of postgraduate training, such as one of our master's courses. These courses invariably demand experience in the field you intend to study. So being able to gain this experience during your undergraduate degree is a great advantage. There's a lot to be gained from joining the scheme. Of course, it will help you identify the areas of psychology you may or may not be interested in. And you'll develop transferable skills such as problem-solving, team-working, communication skills that employers demand and that graduates often lack. Also remember that the placement will offer you networking opportunities to become acquainted with key players in your field. Many of our students who've completed a placement year take up a position with the same employer after graduation or after successfully completing postgraduate training. In fact, many of our students from previous years now hold influential positions in the police, the health service and the private sector as a direct result of their placements. The placement you choose will depend very much on your own area of interest. Those of you who have a particular interest in research can opt for a placement in a hospital unit, here or abroad, working in areas of forensic and clinical psychology. A post here can be very rewarding and allows you to contribute to qualitative and quantitative research data and learn practical research skills you can use in your coursework. For those who prefer hands-on experience of working with patients, there are a wide range of options available. We have links with several charitable and public sector organizations that support stroke patients and people recovering from serious physical trauma, for example due to motoring or industrial accidents. You'll have the opportunity to help them deal with long-term clinical treatment and pain management. There are several opportunities to work with addiction and rehabilitation units. The kind of experience you'll gain here can be very wide-ranging. For example, offering you the chance to observe group therapy and one-to-one counseling sessions for anxiety and anger management classes. Students are encouraged to give their reaction to sessions during regular team meetings, which can often be of benefit to both the student and the organization. For those of you interested in the application of psychology in education, we have a number of students who take placements working with children with special educational needs. Students in the past have worked as teaching assistants and contributed to teacher training workshops. There's a lot more information about this on the website, including case studies written by some of our previous students. These will give you a much wider and richer picture of our placements. As I said earlier, you should already be giving this some serious thought. Our placement officer, Greg Smith, will be able to advise you about the organizations we have contacts with, and we've worked with in the past. Once you've discussed the opportunities available, we ask you to contact the organization concerned to investigate potential positions and to arrange an interview. Your personal tutor will be able to help you with updating your CV and interview skills. During the enrollment process, you'll have been notified of the need to obtain a CRB check. In cases where you're working with vulnerable people, it's a legal requirement that you've had a Criminal Records Bureau check carried out. Without this, we won't be able to approve the placement. If you haven't yet arranged this, you must notify the placement officer of this during your first meeting. He'll give you the necessary paperwork to make your application. Once you have the certificate, please supply a photocopy to the placement officer.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.